And
Right.
so if HIV were to end tomorrow, we would
Right.
still have to confront structural
Right.
homophobia, criminalization,
Right.
immigration, homophobia, racism, all of these things that impact our daily lives
Right.
because we live all these different intersections. And so it would be phenomenal if HIV were over, right? But I also think that if you look at where we are scientifically, we've solved the problem scientifically. We know how to effectively treat HIV. We know how to effectively prevent it. The problem is people aren't getting access to it.
Hmm. Hey everybody, welcome to Duke's Download. I'm Duke Mason, and I'm so happy you're all here today. I wanted to do this episode for World AIDS Month because this is an issue, obviously, as a gay man, that is deeply personal to me. I was born in 1992, so I grew up in the aftermath of the AIDS epidemic, or the height of it, I should say. And I grew up admiring leaders like Larry Kramer and Cleve Jones and people who helped lead the way in terms of fighting the epidemic when it first began during the 1980s. And in the first years of my coming of age as a gay man, I lived in an era before PrEP came to the forefront of our community. And so this is something that I've lived through myself and that I feel very deeply passionate about. And so that's why I am so grateful to have the leaders of Mpact here with us today for World AIDS Month. We have Andrew, who's the executive director. We have Alex, who's the senior director of strategic initiatives and communications. And Mpact, the Global Action for Gay Men's Health and Rights organization, was founded in 2006. It's focused on sexual health and human rights needs for men who have sex with men. Its mission is to ensure equitable access to HIV services and broader sexual health care while promoting the human rights of gay, bisexual, and queer men and other men who have sex with men globally. Its vision, a world where all people, regardless of sexuality, identity, or geography, have the right and access to health, dignity, and justice. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for being here with us today. I really am so grateful.
Pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. We have a lot to cover, so let's dive in. Given that we're doing this episode for World AIDS Month, why do you think it's so important to continue to recognize this day on an annual basis?
Well, I think it's important to recognize this day, this month, this epidemic on an annual basis because there's been a lot less talk about HIV. And why don't we talk about it? It's still an epidemic that is gigantic, disproportionately impacts gay men still. Gay men in the United States are only 2% of the population, but we're 55% of the AIDS deaths in the entire history of it. And so not only is that true, but we're also 66% of new HIV diagnoses, and we're 56% of all people living with HIV in the United States. So this has a huge impact on our community. And I think the reason we don't talk about it is because people don't want to admit that it's still going on with us, that it's still a massive epidemic and a healthcare crisis.
Absolutely. I mean, Mpact has been a key global voice for gay and bisexual men's health for nearly 2 decades. I was mentioning before we started to Alex how mind-blowing it is that you guys operate in 62 countries. I mean, that's both incredibly impressive, but also a testament to how, I mean, the statistics in the United States alone, as you said, are jarring. But the fact that this is an issue that's even more difficult, to say the least, in most other countries around the world. How do you describe Impact's mission today, and how has it evolved since its founding?
Well, we've evolved quite a bit. We're now looking, I think when we originally started, we really looked at doing advocacy with like the World Health Organization and UNAIDS and making sure that gay men were at the table and being able to articulate their needs. We also focused a lot on healthcare settings at the beginning. We really wanted to look at making sure clinics were safe places to be for gay men. And I think as the organization has grown, we've seen the importance of not just health services, but having stronger communities. And that's really been our focus for the last 5 years, is working and building up grassroots voices and grassroots communities.
Mm-hmm. Do you do that through social media or what? I mean, obviously, I know in certain countries, not to make this about myself, but not necessarily in the HIV/AIDS realm, but just in terms of LGBTQ rights across the board. I've been involved in organizations like Outright International for a long time, and I just know just generally that in certain countries, they're monitoring that type of communication online in terms of and prosecuting in some cases people for both communicating on these issues but also posting about LGBTQ related content. So like when you talk about activists or just individuals, LGBTQ plus individuals communicating on this type of stuff, what means of communication are we talking about?
When I first started, I actually wanted Mpact to be 3 clicks away from any queer person wanting to do community work. And Alex has really helped amplify our presence on social media, and not only amplify our presence, but help our partners be able to bring into their voice into social media in the way that's safest for them. Alex?
Well, I think our community has evolved. It's evolved considerably in the past 45 years, and how people engage with one another is radically different than it was 20, 30 years ago. And so we have to be able to embrace new technologies like social media. We have to also be able to sort of approach it from various levels, right? Social media is obvious, but working directly at the community level to understand the needs of community, to allow community to lead, right? So we don't necessarily need to be the ones leading. We can work with them and they can determine what's going to work best for them. And I think to your earlier point, right, because this is about sex, we can't detach it from the fact that nearly 60 countries still criminalize same-sex sexual behavior. So not only are people not getting access to life-saving HIV treatment or prevention, but they're being criminalized. And that brings with it a whole host of other problems when it comes to housing, violence, or getting a job and sustaining themselves economically.
You're right, because those people are dealing with both the issue of being LGBTQ plus as well as the issue of being HIV positive or having AIDS. So that adds it's a multi-layer issues to deal with there. Not to make light of it, but you know what I mean. I mean, it's like it's a pretty big problem, a pretty big challenge for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, you can make light of it. It's hard.
Well, no,
It's hard for a lot of people.
It blows your mind just to think about, like I mentioned before, it's hard enough sometimes here in the US. So in those countries where being gay and being in some cases HIV positive, those are both things that are both in terms of societal judgment as well as legal and political judgment or liability. I mean, it's just it boggles the mind to think about what that experience is like.
I also think that it serves as a form of ongoing community building and inspiration, right? If
Right.
we can work with and witness people that are taking these risks, that are speaking out openly about their sexuality, openly about their HIV status, they're really the ones that are blazing the trail. And that's incredibly brave and incredibly inspirational.
What are the biggest challenges globally that still face gay and bisexual and queer men when it comes to equitable health access? And as part of that, I was curious, which country, I know this might be hard to gauge or to quantify, but for you guys, which country has been the most difficult country have you found to operate in or to work within? But just as a whole as well, like what are some of those biggest challenges that they're still having to face?
Every country has their challenges, I will say.
Even America.
So even America has its challenges. We've been doing a lot of work on the border too here in the US, and that's its own challenge,
Wow.
especially right now. But,
Right.
I think when we talk about places like Uganda, which has a death penalty attached to their anti-gay law, that's a clear case where there's, it's a recipe for disaster for gay men getting HIV care. I think there's also challenges in places where we're criminalized to the point where law enforcement is using Grindr against us, for instance. So if you look at a place like Pakistan or Egypt, those are also challenges. One of our partners in Pakistan who's queer and living with HIV, he has a hard time going to his clinic because he gets beat up because of the way that he presents in terms of gender. And so he tries to reduce the number of times he goes to his clinic just because he doesn't like to get beat up. Those are real big challenges.
Yeah, I mean that's just it's just I don't even know what to say. It's just horrifying, you know. You think it's hard enough sometimes being here in this country. You know, I think it's just important to remember that just because things are generally, although not in all cases, okay in terms of people being able to, having the access to at least seek services here in the U.S. When you think about the fact that people are being physically assaulted just trying to access their care, go to the clinic, it's just beyond horrifying. How do you navigate? How do you navigate? How do you identify and how do you navigate between global strategy and local realities? Like, how do you identify which places have the most needs, and like, do you have an overall strategy about how you identify those places and those communities?
I think local realities always have to inform global advocacy. I think, when we're at tables with the World Health Organization or a UN agency, often we're the only people bringing up gay issues. People would just as soon not say the word gay anymore. And so I think
Mhm.
for us, we always have to uplift the voices of our grassroots partners and be able to talk about their stories in a way that's respectful to them. We're also able to do it because we're not afraid of, well, we weren't afraid of our government turning against us or targeting us. And I think that that's another responsibility we have, is to take that local voice and bring it to the global level. Um,
Mhm.
and I think that there's lots of, you know, it's easy it's not easy, but it's easy to talk about the doom and gloom in some ways. But there's also really amazing things happening on the ground with our community partners, and we also want to uplift those stories of resilience and community building. Um, yeah, Alex.
I mean, I think that so much of it is about investing in our communities, right? So understanding what the potential is for investment, what the potential is for growth, and looking at how the strategies that they've already implemented in terms of the organizing that they're doing, how we can work together with them to strengthen them, how we can see how those sorts of strategies could apply in other places or other countries. Because at the end of the day, it's sort of all these different sets of people doing the work. But if we have the ability to link them, or if we have the ability to share strategies, then it makes a stronger community globally.
Given the current political climate here in the U.S., how has this directly affected Mpact, and how are you navigating that minefield? Like, how much has the political environment here in the U.S. affected your work, both tangibly in terms of funding or support or whatever it may be? Just on what different levels has it impacted the organization?
Well, it's definitely impacted our organization, both economically and politically. Economically, there's been a shortfall in some of our funders because they were receiving money from the US government that's not coming anymore. So that has definitely impacted us materially. On the other side of it, it's also really hard to do advocacy in Washington, D.C. right now, because one
Mhm.
party has done a lockstep of just blocking all appointments. So doing any kind of gay advocacy, LGBT advocacy in Washington, D.C. is made really difficult by that. We are no longer a bipartisan uh, constituency. So that's been super challenging.
Alex?
Sure, it's also created this sense of fear and dread among community activists in the US and around the world, right? They don't know where their funding is going to come from. They can't rely on the things that they could rely on before. And they're scared to think. So, for example, if you think about immigration, right, there was a time when queer people felt like they could find safety and sanctuary in the US, and that's not a reality anymore. And we see how they're treated. We see what happens in ICE detention, and so we have to be able to prioritize that issue as well, because a lot of even progressive organizations are choosing not to prioritize that at our peril.
That's what I found so morally reprehensible about and I should, given I've written an article or two articles on this topic, I feel embarrassed not remembering his exact name, but I remember just being completely disgusted by the whole saga of the individual from Venezuela who was, who was sent to prison in El Salvador, and it just broke my heart because it was symbolic of what has happened to America. That for all our faults and all of our shortcomings in the years of our existence as a country, it just cut right to the core of what has happened to this country. That this place, which I remember watching that documentary "Welcome to Chechnya," I think it was called, a few years ago, and watching these refugees, gay refugees or transgender refugees coming from other countries, fleeing Russia, fleeing Chechnya, fleeing Uganda, fleeing Venezuela, and coming to America, and the idea that whole concept, just in that one case, was send a message across the planet that America is not here for you anymore, was just on so many levels was just heartbreaking, and on a local level, I can say, I don't know if sometimes people, unless you've seen it personally or in your local community, sometimes people don't realize the effects that this administration is already having. Right here in West Hollywood, which is one of the gay enclaves here in the U.S., the clinic that I go to, I've been going to for years to get tested and to get PrEP, closed down. The West Hollywood chapter or location for the Los Angeles LGBT Center, and I asked them why, and they said because we lost our funding from the federal government.
Sure.
I don't want to say like, ooh, woe is me, like I lost my because I mean, literally, all I have to do is go an extra 10 minutes to Hollywood. But it is interesting when you just realize that it has a practical impact, and even on an organization as massive and as well funded as the LGBT Center, even they, lost the capacity to have, that second location, which is, shocking and sad. But
I mean, I think one of the interesting things about the sort of US situation and dynamic that we find ourselves in is that US activists and organizers can learn a lot from global queer activists and organizers, right? So many of them have had to provide things like treatment or PrEP on a shoestring, under very, very difficult conditions. And so I think there's great lessons that can go both ways, right? So that American organizers can have a sense of this can still get done, even under the most severe circumstances. And we have a 40-year history that demonstrates when this happened the first time, American activists and organizers took on the government and the FDA and ACT UP, and in many cases won. And so we should always be mindful of that because it is possible.
What does effective advocacy look like in countries where same-sex relationships are still criminalized or deeply stigmatized? And how do you or can you separate that from the need for HIV, AIDS, healthcare access? Because I guess what I'm asking is there a way to separate that, and how, do you advise people in countries where being gay is criminalized not to bring up their status or their sexual orientation or gender identity? How does that how do those two things either work together, or how do you separate them, if at all possible?
I think for some people it's impossible to separate them, right? Like many people they walk into a clinic, they walk into a job interview, they present as obviously queer. And so that's going to present a vulnerability to them. Obviously, they're not going to present with their HIV. But I think part of that is understanding how are they able to navigate those difficult situations? What lessons can be learned from it? Because we have people that are doing it every single day, right? Like as Andy mentioned in Uganda and other places and Pakistan, we also have a partner in Indonesia who goes to his HIV clinic to pick up his medication, and above the HIV clinic is a big poster talking about how being gay is a sin, right? So it's these dualities that people have to navigate every single day, and I think what's so incredible about that is that they're still able to do it, right? For example, this person that I'm talking about in Indonesia still posts very openly on social media, uses his social media to talk about living with HIV, to talk about PrEP, to talk about undetectable. So these people stand out as examples, and if we're able to amplify those voices, if we're able to increase their representation and visibility, then that will create more representation and more visibility for the larger community.
The conversation about HIV prevention has changed a lot with innovations like PrEP and U equals U, undetectable equals untransmissible. I mean, I first came out and started going out in WeHo, shall we say, in the early 2010s. And I remember so I was like, I would say I'm probably like the last generation that remembers what it was like before PrEP, and those 3 or 4 years before I think I even heard the word PrEP, and what a life-changing and community-changing thing it was. How is Mpact helping to expand access and awareness globally on both the PrEP access front, and also when it comes to the idea of how being undetectable means untransmissible?
So I think certainly our goal is to make sure that people have as much information as possible so they can make informed choices about either their HIV prevention or their treatment or their general sexual health, right? That becomes fundamental when we're talking about our community members. I think the other part is to provide a certain level of nuance and a certain level of focusing on sex and sexuality, right? So it's not just that you take a pill every single day. It's the benefits of taking those pills every day. It means you can have the sex that you want to have, you can pursue pleasure, and you can do it free of anxiety. You can do it free of stress. I mean, I remember when PrEP came out, and I've been positive since almost when you were born, and I almost never had sex with negative guys. And then PrEP changed that, and all of a sudden I found myself having sex with negative guys. So I think there's a scientific way that it's completely altered our experience and our relationship to HIV, but it's also radically altered our relationship to each other as a community, as sexual beings, finding pleasure. And I think that's something that we probably, as a community, haven't explored enough, but there are these profound benefits to treatment and prevention that have changed in the past 20 years that our community is lucky enough to benefit from.
And I think for being able to talk about other advances like U equals U, Alex and I are both openly HIV positive. And so what we do is we also want to show people how to embrace their HIV positive identity, that we can still have sex, that we can still have fulfilling lives. And so we do that by example and also by talking about it with our partners.
You know, this is a question that I have contemplated a lot because it applies not just to this issue, but also just to the whole broader LGBTQ plus rights movement. You know, I remember when same-sex marriage was legalized nationwide. Granted, we don't know if that's going to last, but I remember how interesting it was because, yet again, you know, I was a part of that generation that was young enough to sort of witness I was part of that generation that was old enough to witness the sea change in terms of all these landmark victories that we have taken place, both on Don't Ask, Don't Tell and same-sex marriage, and also young enough to really be the beneficiaries of all of those changes. But what's so interesting is I remember seeing organizations like Freedom to Marry and different places, even Human Rights Campaign after Obergefell had to make changes in terms of its mission and in terms of what it what it was focused on. So I guess my question to you guys is, do you hope to put yourself out of work one day, meaning that we no longer need HIV education and prevention?
I think we would love to be put out of business because of that, because HIV is solved, because homophobia is solved, because human rights issues are solved. And I think that would be amazing. And our vision for that world, that would be an amazing world. I don't think we're anywhere near it, and I think we're actually moving backwards.
Backward.
Um, yeah.
I
Well,
was
I
just going
mean,
to mention, you know, I don't, I forgot the exact uh, details, but you know, this sounds very name droppy, but I'm friendly with David Furnish, you know, Elton John's husband, and I mean, you know, I haven't seen him in a long time, but I would say I was friendly anyway with Elton, but I only bring that up in in the context of the fact that I know that I follow them closely in all the work that they do with their foundation, and I believe that I saw something recently about how they have a goal of like ending HIV itself, you know, or creating an AIDS-free, HIV-free generation by, I don't know if it was 2030 or 2050, or, but I know they have, there is, you know, I don't know how literal they are about that, but I think there seems to be anyway, even if it is way out into the future, there does seem to be, at least for some, a sense that there is a possibility at some point of creating an HIV/AIDS free world, you know, or at least in terms of new transmission. So, um, is that something that you guys think is uh, doable or realistic, or do you think that well, even if it's 50 years down in the future, do you think that that's a remote possibility?
so the objective of our organization is not simply to end HIV, it's to build community, right? And
Right.
so if HIV were to end tomorrow, we would
Right.
still have to confront structural
Right.
homophobia, criminalization,
Right.
immigration, homophobia, racism, all of these things that impact our daily lives
Right.
because we live all these different intersections. And so it would be phenomenal if HIV were over, right? But I also think that if you look at where we are scientifically, we've solved the problem scientifically. We know how to effectively treat HIV. We know how to effectively prevent it. The problem is people aren't getting access to it,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
It's 10 plus years for PrEP, even longer for undetectable. So this is evidence of the fact that even if we can do it scientifically, um, we haven't been successful in ensuring that everyone gets it. I mean, the thousands of people still die of HIV just in the US alone, and we're the wealthiest country in the world.
Hmm.
So that's an indication of where we are when it comes to our response to this epidemic.
Andy, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
I just wanted to highlight the fact that even with the prevention technologies that we've been talking about, even with the prevention technologies that we've been talking about and all the changes in science, the biggest growth in HIV in the world is the Philippines. For 2 years in a row, they've had the biggest increase in HIV cases, and it's like 99% gay men. And so I do think that we're pretty far off. No.
Is that because of the government there, the president, or or is the current president? Is that because of the political climate, or is it related to other issues?
I think it's a combination of lots of things there. I think that there hasn't been an investment in HIV and an investment in gay men. The previous president was also not a big fan of gay men.
Well, that was the thing is, I mean, I'm not you know, I'm interested in politics in general, and I watched. This is kind of going off topic, but I figure might as well. It's kind of interesting. I watched. I don't know if you guys watched the documentary about Imelda Marcos and you know, and the rise of Bong Bong Marcos, and you know, I guess by comparison, not that it's saying much, but I guess by comparison, Bong Bong seems better than Duterte in some ways, but I don't know. That may not be true in the context of LGBTQ plus issues. I don't know, but it's interesting and sad and concerning that that is an area that seems to have a particular issue right now.
It also goes back to a question you asked earlier, right? Like, how do you possibly respond to policies that criminalize same-sex sexual behavior when the people who are in power are going to remain in power for a long time
All
and
right.
they're not going to change their mind? And so policy response becomes frustrating, if not impossible. And so the approach has to be, what's
Mhm.
the cultural response? Like, so for example, gay marriage, right? The culture was ahead of policy when it came to gay marriage, and that helped change gay marriage in the US. So if we and others can invest in cultural norms and community to shift people's thoughts around criminalization of same-sex sexual behavior, then policy will follow.
This actually is not a question that I had prepared, but it's something I've been thinking about. I had a conversation not too long ago with somebody who I won't name them because I was kind of taken aback and disappointed that I had this conversation with them. But somebody brought up to me the fact that there is still, despite all this progress we've seen and visibility and in the last 30, 40 years, obviously, that even despite all the persistent problems, there's still a lot of, there's a lot of problems, but there has been a lot of progress in terms of societal acceptance, not just of HIV or people with HIV and AIDS, but also of the reality of HIV and what causes AIDS and all of that. But it was brought to my attention recently that there are still a lot of people, I wouldn't say a lot of people, there are some people, one of whom is our current Health and Human Services Secretary, who has questioned the link between, that has questioned whether HIV even exists and whether it is the cause of AIDS. And I guess there was a documentary, I don't want to promote it or even really talk about it, but there was a documentary made many years ago about the case for AIDS denial or HIV denialism, and the very people who not to make light of their, the sad, tragic circumstances of their demise, but the very people who made the documentary claiming that HIV didn't cause AIDS and that they died. And RFK Jr. himself is on video saying that he doesn't believe that HIV causes AIDS, that he believes that HIV or AIDS is caused by poppers. And this is a man who proclaims to be an expert on, besides all the other stuff, I remember, and there's a lot, but I remember during the campaign when he was running, seeing this video of him talking about this, and I was completely stunned. Like, even with all the other crazy shit, that he says, that one just blew me away. And I did a deep dive into it because I was like, well, I want to know like what the basis of this issue. Not to go on about it. I want to get to ask you the question, but what I was talking to someone about this, obviously not someone gay, but someone, I won't even go into it, but I was like, even as someone who isn't HIV positive, but who has friends who are HIV positive, who, gets tested, has been on PrEP, has lived in this community now for, almost 20 years of my life as a openly gay man. I was like, I can't even imagine how someone could question something that has been long. I know people who are HIV positive who, because are on the medications they're on, have not gotten to the point, should we say, or shall I say, of having AIDS. Like, it is a fact that is indisputable if based on personal experience. And so I got animated about it because it just blows my mind that this is something that people are even still talking about. So how do you deal with that issue of AIDS denialism or HIV denialism? Is that something that you guys have had to deal with in your organization?
So I think HIV denialism has been around for 40 plus years. It's clearly not a winning issue. They've lost the argument. And the fact that they're still persistent with it shows their lack of connection with the real world. But I think
Mhm.
for us, what we've had to counter is simple misinformation around HIV, right? So like most people aren't AIDS denialists, they know that it exists, but some of them still have misinformation or myths about how HIV is transmitted. So for example, um, we put together in Mexico City, Kissin, where we had people living with HIV come together publicly and kiss and demonstrate their visibility and sexuality. And a right wing pundit or businessman took to Twitter talking about how you can transmit HIV through kissing, right? And we know that's not true. And I think what was so refreshing about that is that the community responded to him, and they responded to him strongly and affirmatively to say, look, the evidence is clear, what you're saying is crazy. And so I think that there are more people that know the facts, that understand the facts, and they're willing to push out the messages to people to ensure that everyone has the best information about HIV and HIV transmission.
When I would tell people about the video of RFK Jr. saying that, they'd go, "There's no way," and I would say, "Hold on a minute," and I would pull up the video, and their minds would literally just explode. Like, what? I mean, I mean, all the other stuff is bad enough, but that, when I saw that, I said, okay, like this guy is like, it's anyway. I'm going to stop there because I've already taken up like 20 minutes ranting about it. But what would you say is the most promising HIV advancement out there right now? Because I know there's been talk of a vaccine, or I mean, I guess PrEP, or there it sort of is in a sense, not a vaccine, but a preventive care treatment. But what would you say is the biggest, in terms of medically and scientifically, the biggest advancement that's out there right now?
Yeah, so I would actually say that, you know, being virally suppressed and being able to live a normal life is probably the best thing for me and for our community that we
Mhm.
can look at. The advances that are being put forward, like the long-acting injectables, where people will be able to
Right. That's what I
get an injection once every 6 months, soon to be a year, those kinds of things, that those will be
Yep.
game changers for lots of people who feel like they have to conceal their identity, conceal, you know, um, how they take medication, that they're even taking medication. So it's an exciting time.
Yeah, and I would add, it's not explicitly scientific, but the fact that we have scores of people living with HIV who can live and be healthy and be present in their community, they can have a relationship, they can go to school, they can start a business, they can actively participate in what it means to be a small C citizen. That has an enormous impact on our community to see these people exist. They can find satisfaction, they can find pleasure. And from a prevention standpoint, there's nothing more reassuring than to see that, because so many negative guys still are so afraid of what an HIV diagnosis could mean. And so to be able to
Mhm.
witness HIV positive folks living their best life, if you will,
Mhm.
does have an enormous impact.
Absolutely. I mean, I know I live in a bubble here in West Hollywood, but it seems to me, I mean, not that there was, I mean, at least for me, there was certainly never a stigma. I mean, I grew up, friends of my mom's, growing up were HIV positive. I mean, so it was never something that I had a personal fear or stigma or whatever it was. But it seems to me that by and large, yes, you still hear there's still, of course, I don't want to diminish in any way. Of course, there's still bigotry and and stigma and all that, and people that judgment with some people. But at least within my community, it seems like people, it's a completely different mindset and I mean, I know, I have a lot of friends who are sexually active. I'm currently in a monogamous relationship, but before that, I just, there's really, at least in certain areas, it seems like that stigma and that fear, or that, that thing that was there before in terms of that, is gone, or at least is significantly diminished compared to where it was a decade or so ago. So, in that sense, I think we're making progress. I hope we continue to see that grow, and you guys are a big part of seeing that happen. So I thank you for all the incredible work you guys are doing. And on that, I think we'll leave it on a high note. I think I just really, really appreciate you both being here. I've had a great time, and it's been a really, really fascinating conversation. And I really thank you for everything you guys are doing. It's amazing.
Thank
Oh,
you.
most importantly, how can people support the organization?
Sure. Well, you can follow us on Instagram. Our tag is at Mpact, Mpacte. mpact.global, Mpact Global on Instagram. Our website is www.impactglobal.org, and you can see all the work we're doing and support us through there.
Can people donate
Yes.
on the website?
Yes, you can go to our website, and we'd love for your support, and we'd love to be able to keep in touch with you.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. Thank you for all the great work, and thanks for being here today, like I said.
Thank
It's been
you.
a pleasure.
Thank you all for joining us today. I thought that was a really interesting and fun conversation, and enlightening, considering all the challenges that we're facing in the world right now when it comes to these issues. So really, thank you. Please like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to review and comment. I'll definitely respond. And also, if you have any questions or comments, email us at questions@dukesdownload.com. All right, thanks everybody. Talk to you soon. Look forward to releasing the next episode, which I'm sure you will enjoy. Bye. Thank you for joining me today on Duke's Download. This podcast is part of Pride House Media, hosted by me, Duke Mason, and produced and edited by Josh Rosenzweig. Original music composed by Nell Balaban. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. While you're there, leave us a rating and review. It really helps others to discover the show. I'd love to stay connected with you, so join the conversation by following me at James Duke Mason on Instagram and X, or by emailing me at questions@dukesdownload.com.